Hello, everybody. Section 3 of Chapter 6. What would a war between Earth and aliens or alien AIs or something like that look like? It's not looking good for us. That's what I'm going to tell you so far. You know, I'm not talking about aliens that have our level of technology or something 20 years ahead of us, because 20 years ahead of us isn't going to get us outside the solar system. It's going to barely get us around the solar system, right? In order for hostile aliens to get here, assuming they're not killing us from a standoff distance using stars turned into plasma and X-ray lasers, right? Or using relativistic kill missiles or anything like that. And I forgot to mention in the previous videos, if these UFO UAPs can travel the way they do and have access to the entire planet, it's not that hard for them to drop off genetically engineered bioweapons or poison gas or anything like that. It would be child's play for them. Again, even using our own weapons and technology as payloads, it becomes exponentially deadlier because of the maneuverability, the velocity, the energy they possess, the access they have to everything. They can penetrate our airspace with immunity, it seems. They can go to our nuclear facilities and, you could kill us with kettlebells. If you had 35 to 60 to 100-pound kettlebells and you're dropping them from orbit or just above an aircraft carrier, dropping kettlebells from a big enough height on an aircraft carrier could sink it without a payload, especially if you can, aside from the velocity they build up from falling, if you put a UAP style propulsion system, it'll go through all of our air defenses, go straight through the ship, deforming as it goes, right? So the Shepard Uchkin orbital dart system is something came up in a conversation. My friend Carl Shepard, um, he had experience in the Army and EOD, so he's familiar with things like IEDs and explosions. And he said, you could simply drop rebar on people. He envisioned it as dropping, for example, from a drone onto a tank. He's basically talking about an inert bomb, okay? But he also said you could launch it from orbit. You could just drop it from a satellite or whatnot. And, I said, well, what if you put the same ceramic shielding on the space shuttle on one end of that rebar? Now, one end is weighted down, so it's going to drop straighter. And, he developed the idea further. It's mostly his idea, but I had some input to it, and I'm going to add some input to it today. So, let's say you're launching it from orbit, which is where I envision it. You can put fins on the back like a dart or the fletching on an arrow and, put some maneuverability to it. And with minimal electronics, you could even guide it remotely. You can kind of guide it in using the friction of the air, right? So another thing you could do is you could have on this satellite of yours, you could have multiple sizes, multiple weights. You could add warheads, conventional high explosives, potentially nuclear. At this point, you're just talking about dropping bombs, but I want to stick to the original rebar thing because rebar is cheap. Any country can make and does make rebar. So if you put like a ton of rebar and they're all in sections about 4 feet long and one end is covered, with ceramic shielding, it's not going to lose a lot of mass. It's going to have a lot of kinetic energy. It's a low cost way of producing a bombardment from space, and if you can simply guide it a little bit or aim properly, you can devastate things. I mean, I also envision reservoirs of this. If you had a large, let's call it a military satellite with stores of such rebar with and without payloads, and you put them on the Lagrange points, which expands the idea Carl and I talked about. If you put them in the Lagrange points and you put a propulsion system on those satellites, not just to keep them in the Lagrange points, but you can move them out of that during a military situation. You can put them in Earth orbit. You can put them in orbit around the moon, and if you have enough power, you can bring them back to the Lagrange point when the mission's over. So, utilizing that incredible maneuverability, you have a lot of undetectable or barely detectable projectiles powered by gravity and producing devastation, right? It's not something to be taken lightly. And I think just mentioning this on a video, someone may adopt this, right? Now, you can do things with a rebar. Rebar has a certain shape, but you could produce rebar like stuff with a different shape, a different cross section made of different materials. Like lead is something with a very low melting point, but if you produce like a lead and iron alloy, you've got something weighty. It's a single use, so it doesn't need to be as sturdy as rebar. You cover it, especially one end in ceramic, heat resistant ceramic, and now you've got basically a kinetic weapon, and a lot cheaper than, say, the payload of a F-22 Raptor, right? So the higher up you go, the more momentum it has and kinetic energy it delivers. So if your satellite is capable of releasing a cloud of these and timing it, so let's say you have kind of a linear thing being dropped off, just like the old school World War II bombers, but it's being dropped from orbit and it's hard to detect. It barely shows up on radar because of the ceramic. You could drop it on, for example, an aircraft carrier task force. You could drop it on enemy armored formations. And depending on the energy you have in the satellite could move and shift its orbit. So even a satellite killing rocket might have trouble with it because it doesn't maintain just one orbit, right? There's a lot you can do with this. Now imagine this with alien technology. Imagine this with technology that's not just decades ahead of ours, but millennia ahead of ours. That would be something. All right. So, the Shepard-Uchkin orbital dart system is what I'm calling it, and it's mostly Carl's ideas, but I have and I had and still have some ideas that could be adopted to it, right? Matter of fact, here's one that just occurs to me. You drop off the rebar, and then it goes out in a batch, and then you drop a smaller batch of rebar, and let's say 20 of them in a more dispersed pattern, and on each of them you put a radio transmitter. It could only be as big as my thumb, powered by a AA battery, and it gives off radio signals, pings, and it attracts their anti-missile defenses, their anything designed to target satellites. It acts like chaff, but it kind of actively lures stuff in because it's giving off a radio signal. And so the rebar is coming here, sort of a little bit behind it is all this radio signal, and all your enemy force, and it's like miles away from the what's going to hit them, right? So their aircraft, their satellites, their ground-based radar starts focusing in the wrong direction, opening up their defenses for a cloud of deadly rebar, right? I mean, it's literally that easy when you possess the high ground. It works that way in combat. If you're up a hill in fortified positions, you dug in, you got sandbags, you got overlapping fields of fire with automatic weapons, and behind you are mortars, and you can call for fire. It is really tough to take that hill. Even armor, it slows down going uphill. Meanwhile, your projectiles are, a flatter trajectory, things like that. You can aim easier. As individual troops slow down, you can more easily shoot them. You can lay landmines. The high ground is where you want to be, and space is the ultimate high ground. All right. What else could these aliens have? First of all, if they had the ability to miniaturize powerful generators, I'm talking nuclear fusion, antimatter. If you could take the power output of, let's say, a fusion plant that is as efficient at fusion as we are at nuclear fission, it's kind of hard to envision, but we're talking about a tremendous amount of power. All right. What if you could make that fit inside a rifle or a pistol? All right. Now you have the potential to shoot laser beams, conventional lasers. We do have lasers that can shoot down things like drones and aircraft, but they're not that maneuverable. They take a tremendous amount of power and they shoot a continuous beam. Okay, and what that means is if you have to kind of hold it on the target and track it long enough for that to happen, and you're just eating up tons and tons of power. But what if power wasn't a constraint? You just had, you know, each soldier walks around with a rifle capable of producing gigawatts upon gigawatts of laser power, and you can shoot it in a burst. First of all, there's no recoil, so reacquiring your point of aim, your natural point of aim, is easier. Okay? And, you could cut through metal and things like that. And, if it's on a burst, it's a lot harder to see where the gunfire is coming from. Okay? Now, another thing is particle beams, which is something we have that, and there's been talk of it. Again, it's very large, very power intensive. If you could put something like that in the size of a machine gun, a gun turret, or a rifle, then you've got advanced weaponry with great standoff capability. You probably could outrange an M16 anything within line of sight, and you don't have to worry about rounds falling short, or you have to aim high and let it drop down. That would be something. All right. So what would a War of the Worlds look like? Not that good. Not that good for us, great for them. In movies like Starship Troopers, and I love that movie, they always kind of envision the aliens coming in with small unit tactics, maybe some ground vehicles, right? I mean, we're capable of air-land battle, but it seems like no movie alien is. They're either like in Independence Day attacking from the air, or like in Starship Troopers fighting one-on-one with us on the ground with handheld weapons. I mean, it's like aliens didn't discover artillery. That's silly. Okay. And if their technology is advanced enough to get them here, by definition, they would have to have all kinds of power and energy and mobility that we don't. All right. So let's be glad that it hasn't happened. Now, I'm going to go on to the next section. I'm going to talk about what I call the Uchgun paradox, only because I haven't seen it articulated anywhere. And, I want to put my name on it. All right. So that's going to be our next video, which we're going to come back in a bit. And I hope you're going to like it. And give me a moment to catch my breath, take a nice deep breath, settle my mind, because I'm getting excited. I love talking about this topic. And we're going to get back to you.